Hurricane damage without a hurricane. That's what may be in store for Louisiana's oil refining and shipping industries as record floodwaters make their way down the mighty Mississippi River. And the damage could provide investors with another reason to bid up commodity prices. Andy Lipow has more than 30 years of experience in oil refining and trading at firms including J. Aron and Amoco. He's now president of Lipow Oil Associates, a consulting firm, and he's with us this morning from Houston. Andy, welcome to the show. Just how bad could this be? When we talk about hurricane damage without the hurricane, what are we talking about?
Well, the worst case is as the Mississippi River rises and we get actual flooding into the refineries. That could shut them down for several months like we saw with Hurricane Katrina. So that's the worst case scenario. In the interim, what we're expecting is a disruption to the barge and tanker traffic up and down the river.
Okay, we need to break all of those statements down into component parts. When might we see flooding so bad that it could flood the refineries?
Well, then you would see that around May 24th, which is when the river is expected to crest nearly 20 feet above flood stage.
Okay, and has that ever happened before? How much precedent is there for the river rise? I mean, we know these are record levels, so record implies no precedent, but have these refineries ever been flooded in the past?
Well, certainly during Hurricane Katrina, we saw a Conoco, Phillips, and a Murphy oil refinery get substantially flooded. They were offline between 6 and 9 months due to substantial amounts of flooding.
Oh, I meant with flooding on the Mississippi itself.
Well, years
Not
ago,
hurricane
actually,
related.
there's another spillway up near Baton Rouge called the Morganza Spillway, and that goes into the Atchafalaya River. And there's a small refinery in Krotz Springs that saw some minor flooding back in 1973.
So, Andy, worst case scenario, how much of the U.S. refining capacity could be taken offline if all of the refineries close enough to the Mississippi to be susceptible to flooding are in fact flooded?
Well, between the Baton Rouge and New Orleans area, we have about 13% of the refining capacity, which equates to 2.5 million barrels a day. So it's a substantial amount of gasoline and distillate fuel that would be off the market.
And look, it's very difficult to make predictions about just how bad the flooding will be, but is the sense that you get right now that catastrophic flooding in the order that you're describing to flood the refineries is quite likely?
No, actually, I think it's probably going to be unlikely. It's the Mississippi River that is flooding. The area around the refineries has been quite dry, so we don't have what we call the big storm surge like during a hurricane, which would completely inundate the lower delta.
Let's talk about some of the more near-term impact of the flooding. You mentioned the barge traffic and the impact on commodities shipping up and down the river. How bad is that right now, and what do we have to look forward to, so to speak, which in all likelihood isn't going to be good?
Well, we've already seen parts of the Mississippi up around Memphis and Cairo, Illinois being closed, so that impacts the barge traffic coming out of the Midwest down to the New Orleans area. But as this water heads down south, you can imagine the current gets swifter, and with all the turns in the Mississippi, it makes it very difficult to navigate, so the tanker traffic will be disrupted.
Andy, most people aren't familiar with the scale of shipping on the Mississippi, especially down in that lower part. Talk to us about how many barges are on the river, what they're carrying.
Well, throughout the Mississippi River, there's over 20,000 barges, and they're carrying not only oil products, but agricultural goods like soybeans, corn, as well as ethanol comes down. Petrochemicals as well are moving up and down the river from the Chicago area. So
you don't just analyze the fundamental elements of the oil and commodities industries. You're also looking at prices. Do you anticipate that this flooding is going to be enough of a supply problem to be a catalyst for prices to reverse the declines that we've seen last week?
Well, I think it definitely has that possibility, as well as when the water moves down the river, there's a number of production facilities that could also be affected, impacting crude oil supply. So I think the bias is really to the upside until the river crests and makes its way past the refineries.
And as you say, that's about 2 weeks from now.
Exactly.
All right, Andy, thanks so much for being with us here on the Inside Track. Andy Lipow, president of Lipow Oil Associates. He was with us from Houston this morning. As you heard it, he just said the worst case scenario is hurricane-like damage, but he doesn't anticipate it's going to be quite that bad.